So I know I've kind of disassociated myself from reviews in general, but one thing I haven't officially confessed to doing is distancing myself from cartoons. I don't watch almost anything new. To be fair, it's mostly due to time. I sometimes watch stuff that I saw in the past. On a similar subject, does anyone remember that video I made on the romance of Star vs. the Forces of Evil and some of my issues with it? Well, funny thing is, that video was made in response to events that were happening in the middle of Season 3, but because of some things that happened in the following season, a lot of people have clicked on that video as a sort of reaction to the frustration they were apparently feeling. I got a lot of comments talking about shit that was way ahead of what I knew, because up until recently I hadn't even seen Season 4 of Star, but now I'm actually watching it and I still don't know what people are talking about. Granted, I'm still at the very beginning, like episode 6 or 7 as of writing the script. I may or may not share some breakdowns of what happened in the season finale if anything insane happens. I know I probably will have to talk about the ships at one point because there are some things I do want to comment on, but today I want to talk about a specific subject which has to do with the show's format. Now, I don't want to share my opinion on the series because, frankly, I don't care. I do, however, want to talk about other people's opinions and shit on them. If there's one monkey brain cringe take I've heard over the years, is this idea that Star Forces went downhill, at least in part due to how it shifted from having an episodic format to a more serialized and overarching structure. Now, to be fair, this isn't necessarily a stance that everyone has. I think most people are fine with the series having returning storylines, but it is a position I've heard several times from people who seem to feel nostalgic for the early seasons. Now, one of the reasons why this take pisses me off is because, as someone who actually likes serialized shows, Star Forces doesn't even feel like that most of the time. Even episodes that tend to carry certain character developments that have been running for seasons, some of them have these conveniently specific plot catalysts that are there to drive out conflicts for the episodes in question, conflicts that don't really feel like they're a result of a stream of build-up and feel more like stuff made for the episodes in question. And honestly, I ain't here to judge because ultimately it's part of the show's identity. Not one of a linear serialized story, but really more like an episodic series that is operating under overarching narratives. At the end of the day, Star Vs has a lot of standalone episodes, and while rarer to find in the very last season, even in Season 3 you could still find episodes that are suitable for sporadic reruns, which is what the television entertainment business was largely built off of, especially on the animation side of things. It was only until recently when it became more acceptable for animated series to be more serialized and allow for arcs and world building to take place, instead of having a premise that restricted itself to resetting its stage so that the next episode can potentially be played side by side, which benefited the system of reruns and syndication. However, it seems like now that we are seeing more serialized cartoons, while there are a number of people who are excited to experience these kinds of shows, there's also a large group of people that seem to show repulsion to this trend, to the point where I'll often see people look down on Star Forces for abandoning the format it had at the beginning of the series when it was a little more episodic in its nature. I think to me, what irks me the most is whenever people start being more spiteful with their claims about the intentions of the creators, some even saying that Star Vs only became serialized as a way to capitalize on the trend of the recent boom of overarching cartoons, which is probably the most bullshit, baseless accusation I've heard about this show so far. What makes you believe that this wasn't the direction that the series was intending on taking from the very beginning? I think people exaggerate how different the early seasons were from the very last ones. While it is true that the series kept escalating in its story arcs, it wasn't like the early material was devoid of any arcs. Season 1 was the shortest out of all of them, and a lot of what was told there served as build-up for what would happen later on. This was the same season where Tom got introduced as an ex-boyfriend of Star who would later become a recurring character with love triangle plots. This was also the season when Miss Heinous first debuted, a villain that would not only come back in later episodes, but she would also play a huge role in the lore of the series. Like, bro, she was literally Eclipse's daughter, and this was something that was very much foreshadowed in this very same season, the same episode where she first appeared. She started having clover marks on her cheeks the second a butterfly manifested nearby her, which very strongly implies that she might be tied to the butterfly lineage. We also had an episode where Star was browsing through the history books and started to notice that monsters might have been unjustly ostracized by her civilization, a plot point that became heavily integral in the later seasons. We also got introduced to Toffee, a character that would later become the season 1 finale villain, and yet was introduced in earlier episodes and slowly built up, which also debunks this idea that season 1 had no arcs, We also later saw that despite him having regenerative powers, he seemed to be missing a finger, something that would later be explained during a backstory involving Star's mother. So no, I don't want to hear this utter nonsense that Star Vs only became more story driven later on to ride on the trend of modern cartoons. It is a horseshit, unfounded accusation made by people who probably haven't watched the early seasons in a while, if not ever. And even if this wasn't initially planned, I don't even see that as a negative. I don't know why a lot of people have this notion that a series not being planned is a bad thing. I think this mostly comes from people who've never actually created things with regular deadlines and don't understand how tight and flexible production cycles are. Creators don't always know exactly what direction they want to go with a series when it starts off. In fact, before the show was even pitched to Disney, the premise of the series wasn't even the same as what we eventually saw. Star was meant to be a lot younger, and the series was supposed to be about a hyper-imaginative girl who pretended to fight against monsters, so she was basically Ichiban from Yakuza 7, until Disney and other networks started to shed to light more magic fantasy cartoons during the early 2010s, and Darren FC saw this as an opportunity to change the series into something else when she came to pitch, which she then assured she was more satisfied with the change in tone. So with that, I have no reason to believe why this series becoming more serialized wasn't a decision that Darren Nefsey herself might have been more satisfied evolving the series to. People like to say that the show was just hopping on a trend, but if you look into interviews of other animators out there in the industry, lots of them wanted to write more story-driven cartoons but were limited to the demands of the network.
And I never really had a plan for an ending because just the nature of 7-minute and 11-minute cartoons in those days were that you really weren't allowed to change anything, ever, because the idea was out of that batch of 52 or 76 episodes, the networks need to be able to pick out any one of them and air it in any order they please, so there couldn't be really a story stringing it together. And even though, it's something I've always been interested in is more serialized storytelling. It's just that wasn't on the menu. So I did get to slip in little things that we built on over time, like Irwin's lineage and Nurgle Jr. getting born. That was always kind of in the plan, but I didn't even put that in the Bible because I knew they would make me take it out. Just because it was like a radical change to the structure of the show. But
while it is true that we have seen some story-driven cartoons over the decades, for the most part, this has been the norm. And I have no doubt in my mind that Darren Nefsey would have wanted her show to take on the same direction. She has stated that two shows that influenced her were Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball, two very much serialized shows, in fact, a lot more serialized than Star Vs, since both those shows are based on serialized manga that don't have the same network demands as American TV. And you can have whatever preference you want as far as which phase of the show's runtime you liked more, but to me, when I hear people say that Star Vs should have stick with the episodic format it had in the earlier seasons, to me, that comes off as very dismissive of what Darren Nefsey wanted to do with the series. It shows you haven't put in the effort to try to understand what vision and inspiration she had for the series, and you're not even willing to respect her creative decisions, instead resorting to belittle the efforts of the creators in trying to expand the series into something they wish to see. You're discounting all of the work and passion they've put into trying to create a world defined by social-political conflicts between monsters and Mumen, the contrast between a queen that tries her best to accommodate the demands of the Mumen civilization, and one that wants to unify two conflicting races, and the struggles that come from managing both at the same time. To me, regardless of how I actually feel about the series, I would not try to discount the world building and claim that all of the lore and themes should have been reduced to wacky episodic villain of the week type of series. And it's not because I don't respect those type of shows, because I definitely do. I just also show respect to what creators are trying to build with their actual series and not be condescending to them in the process. I know I kinda got religious there at the end, and trust me, I am not done talking about Star vs. Discourse. I just have to finish season 4 to get a little more perspective on things, which is not easy because this shit is too long for the amount of time I have now. So yeah, bad cartoon takes aside, I recently watched this cool interview called The Twilight of the Yakuza by Real Stories, which actually inspired some ideas out of me. I do recommend watching the interview, and stay tuned for more videos in the future. In the meantime, I hope you all have a nice day.